G'day YouTube, Warbles on a lot here with yet another little movie about the 2013 election, federal election in Australia. And this has to do with being an update on the movie I put up the other day about the most fake Twitter account following in Australian federal politics being Jamie McIntyre's. Well, Jamie McIntyre's had a bit more to say. Here we have yesterday's Reality-Awarenes Examiner for Tuesday, August 13th. And in here on page 2 of the Examiner for August the 13th, 2013, we have a great big slab: McIntyre wages war with the Australian Electoral Commission. So I propose to put the camera on a tripod and read to you what Jamie McIntyre has to say in an interview with the Reality-Awarenes Examiner. Okay, camera is on the tripod and I am moving into position to be sitting in front of a fire and reading the events of the day. This is, of course, a malt liquor video. Cooper's malt liquor. Label out. Okay. McIntyre wages war with the AEC. Fiery New England candidate Jamie McIntyre put his money where his mouth is last Friday, promising $1 million to the person who can prove that he was not deliberately duped out of the current elections ballot paper by the Australian Electoral Commission (AEC). Speaking to the Reality-Awarenes Examiner after Thursday night's Q&A session at the Reality-Awarenes and District Services Club, Mr McIntyre brought the AEC under fire, claiming, quote, deliberate gross incompetence, unquote, that prevented his 21st Century Australia Party from becoming fully registered in time for the coming federal election. According to Mr McIntyre, the majority of Australian voters are, quote, fed up with the two major parties, unquote, bracket Labor and the Coalition, close bracket, and claimed to have evidence that supports the use of what he called, quote, deliberate tactics to prevent the 21st Century Party being in the election, unquote. According to Mr McIntyre, the process to register the 21st Century Australia Party in the coming election was originally lodged on May the 2nd. However, the process was twice unsuccessful in passing the preliminary stages of registration, which require a non-parliamentary party to successfully provide 500 member names from a maximum list of 550. Mr McIntyre maintains that his party's member roll runs into the area of 1,000 members. However, when cross-referenced by the AEC, produced only 419 members from the original list of 550. And on a second attempt produced 483 as the clock ticked forward to July 15. In spite of the Electoral Act of 1918 stating that in order to be eligible for registration a party must contain 500 cross-referenced members, Mr McIntyre maintained that the time it took to cross-reference his original application was unreasonable to the point of being, quote, deliberately grossly incompetent, unquote. Fresh quote, if I was to say to a private sector employee, here are 550 names, please cross-reference them against a database to find 500 that are on the electoral roll, 3 hours would not be an unreasonable time frame to complete the task. 3 hours. 180 minutes to cross-reference 500. So he reckons 20 seconds to cross-reference each one. He does not advocate doing any kind of a comprehensive check, does he? Mr McIntyre said. Mr McIntyre also said that in all likelihood the AEC knew that the new election date following the return of Prime Minister Kevin Rudd would fall on or before the scheduled date of September 14, scheduled by the previous Prime Minister, and the Prime Minister gets to pick. Quote, I knew that they knew it was most probable that the election would be called earlier. I knew that they knew that it was most probable. Right? 3 orders of magnitude out into bullshittery, Mr McIntyre said. Irrespective of the election date, Mr McIntyre maintained that his party was deliberately delayed in reaching the election, preventing what he called, quote, the only legitimate third party threat in decades, unquote. He doesn't see the Greens as a third party, from appearing on the ballot paper. Ultimately, the AEC is legally obliged under Section 127 of the Electoral Act to freeze all processing applications from the day of the issue of the writ, which was August the 12th, until the completion of the election. Mr McIntyre's party was due to be fully registered on August the 16th, enabling it to appear on the ballot paper. Instead, it is now listed under notices of, quote, current party registration applications inviting objection, requiring party name to be published for a minimum period of 1 month in major newspapers in all states, inviting public objection to the registration before full registration can be completed. And personally, if I could be bothered, I would object to the registration of his party on the grounds that 21st Century Australia Party is almost identical to the 21st Century Australia Education Proprietary Limited and a number of the other 12 companies that Jamie McIntyre has registered on the stock exchange. It would be kind of like having the Murdoch News Party registered as a political party. But, you know, that's just my opinion. Quote, the only reason we are not on the ballot paper is because the AEC does not want us in the election, unquote, Mr McIntyre said. Mr McIntyre was unable to offer any reason for such an action. However, quote, they did it, unquote, he said, quote, for what reason, who knows, unquote. Mr McIntyre feels that most of the Australia's ills can be solved by better money management. As such, his primary policy movement, if elected, would be to incite a, quote, psychological shift, unquote, by instilling a private sector mentality into government. Further policies by the McIntyre Party, now note that it says the McIntyre Party. The Glen Innes Examiner has ceased to call it the 21st Century Australia Party, they're calling it the McIntyre Party. I don't know whether that means they're backing off or they're pushing harder, but they've changed. The McIntyre Party also include a 10 to 20 year plan to cut red tape and a 9-year phase out of state governments. Also, according to Mr McIntyre, quote, we need immigrants to build this country, unquote, and immigrant workers would be happy to work at a lower wage to stimulate the busyness sector. Quote, allow immigrants to come to Australia for the first 3 to 5 years and take an apprentice or trainee type wage, unquote, Mr McIntyre said. Mr McIntyre will now enter the coming election as an independent. His 150 candidates in 150 seats in Australia, plus his Senate candidates, have shrunk to himself in 1 seat. Mr McIntyre will now enter the coming election as an independent and said that if elected he would move immediately to represent the 21st Century Australia Party. He would represent taxpayers and workers and, quote, stand up, unquote, against what he called, quote, bureaucrats who have no idea how to run the country, unquote. Fuck, I hope he loses a lot of money on this. Wobbles on a lot to YouTube. There's more to life than being an Amway salesman. Sorry about that, Jamie-McIntyre, 21st century Australiarse.